Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We'll give everyone just a few seconds to join to join the room. This webinar is on IT considerations for your remote workforce, your remote team. We've got an exciting panel with us today that I'll introduce in just a moment. Again, just seeing some people filter in here. Thank you again for joining. A few quick items. Hello, everyone. We're seeing you in the chat. Yeah, thank you. A few quick items before we kick off is, yes, please use the chat. We want this webinar to be a live panel discussion. We want to be taking your questions and answering them as they come up. We'll have time at the end, of course, but if you have a question during the presentation, feel free to ask it and we'll jump it in. I will also be jumping in on occasion to ask questions to this group, the three individuals we'll have. So be prepared for that. And also, as always, we will have a recording of this webinar available after the fact, hopefully later today, if not beginning of next week. We'll have this recording that you are also free to share with colleagues or friends. Also, just wanted to let you know about future webinars. We are doing webinars once a week right now. Last week, if you joined us last week, we had a training on Microsoft Teams, and we have a recording of that, and also future sessions scheduled with that. Next week, we will have a presentation, a webinar on disaster recovery for your business. Also a pretty relevant topic, we think, and we're excited about the presentation there. That will actually be on Thursday of next week. And again, we can send out links to that to anybody who registered, and we'll have that there. Okay. I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers today. I've got with us Chris Noakes, who is the CTO at Executech. Chris is one of the longtime employees here at Executech, and he's one of our go-to guys for problem solving and for all things IT. We also have Michael Pearson, who's the Senior Vice President at Executech. He founded DSA Technologies, which is now an Executech company and part of our Sacramento office. And Michael's also a pro when it comes to IT management, cloud consulting, and customer services. And then finally, we were joined by Jeff Palazzo, who did our Microsoft Teams training last week and is, of course, a pro when it comes to Microsoft and cloud services. So I will now turn the time over to them and this presentation.
We certainly appreciate everyone joining, and again, just glad to have you all with us. We have a very brief slideshow. We'll jump into the slideshow. It'll go through, reasonably quickly, and then the goal really is to let everyone ask questions and make sure that we're getting that done for you. So I'm going to go on ahead and launch our slideshow for us here, and get us going. So hopefully you guys can all see the slideshow. Gary, is that working for you? Perfect. So again, we're awesome. So the big thing that we're talking about now is, what are some of the challenges working from home? How is this impacting business? We just want to go through these things, have a very casual kind of conversation about it. At the same time, give you guys a chance to ask questions, and then we'll take a whole lot of questions at the end. But just talking about the security and the other challenges and ways to actually make this work for you. And that'll be real important for us. And then talking about some of the tools that are available. I think one of the big things that we see with companies is as they're looking at going to the cloud is, what are some of those challenges? Or going to the work from home model, what are those challenges? And for a lot of our clients, they just weren't prepared from a disaster recovery standpoint. They weren't cloud ready. Maybe they didn't have the right equipment. For those of you that were looking for equipment and came late to the game, you quickly found out that getting equipment wasn't possible. I think right now the current deadline or the current due for equipment we're seeing out is mid-April at the soonest. And the other thing, though, that we really wanted to remind people is tell our clients that, look, culture is about your people. It's not about a place. So yes, this is a change. Yes, it's very different from what you're used to doing, but the culture is really about who your people are and how you're working with them, and not to get too hung up on the fact that everyone's working from home. It's how do we make this still the same company, and how do we encourage you guys and give you guys the tools to accomplish that task.
I'll try and keep you guys flowing, but I do want to jump in with questions here and then for both maybe you and maybe Chris, who have managed large teams, especially at Executech and in DSA, where the teams have already been remote. What are some specific things that have worked? I know at Executech we've done team activities, which aren't really as much of a possibility now, but what are some specific things you recommend, and maybe some things that don't work or that we should avoid when it comes to maintaining culture and communication?
Yeah, so Chris, you want to talk about some of those things that you guys have done?
Yeah, so as far as like culture goes, and I think this is probably something that'll come up in one of the other slides as well, but making sure that the communication is there that we would normally have in the office. For us, it has to do with like we usually have a morning call, right? Well, there's that, but then we're missing some of that face-to-face interaction, and so I think it's leveraging the tools and the things that we have and using like video chats, using Teams and things of that nature, and then as a manager or working with your individual teams, I think having follow-up calls at the end of the day just to check in with everybody, see how everybody's doing, see what people have been able to accomplish, what they're struggling with, if they're having issues with equipment working from home, how is that being addressed, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that became real important for us is, we're all security conscious. We all had these covers over our cameras, and we would have a call, but no one would necessarily use video. We're getting everyone used to the fact that it is nice to see your face. You do want to turn on your video camera and let people see you, and that's really helped for us as well, just to make sure that we have that happening. I think one of the things that as we're looking at this and looking at how do we keep up with the culture at home and how do we do that, we were talking a little bit about events and making sure that we're still sharing video, but really it's flexibility, but still expecting results, right? Even though people are at home and their lives are a little bit more complicated, their kids are likely at home, we got pets at home, so there has to be some flexibility, but it doesn't mean we could change what we expect in terms of results. We still really want our people focused on what results they're still producing, and are they able to get the job done, and what do we need to help to make that happen? What tools do we need to help? How do we communicate better? And as a leader, just making sure that we check in with people and we're communicating with them to make sure we're meeting their needs. Leadership at this time is very critical. One of the things I've talked about with several people is, for those of us that either manage millennials or who have companies led by millennials, this is really their first significant crisis as adults, or maybe in the workplace. And I think it's real important for those of us that have been through a few of these, whether that's 2008, whether it's September 11th, or whether we go back from there, to be able to guide them through the fact that this is going to pass. We need to lead right now and really guide them and give them what they need so that they can be better leaders and help themselves out as well to get through this. And then at the same time, not neglecting our client needs. Whoever our client happens to be, how are we helping them and how are we meeting their need during this time? Because they're in the same struggle that we are. And if we're forgetting about our clients, we're creating a longer term problem that we want to avoid. So Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about the business at home side of things?
Yeah. I'm a 18 years or so veteran of working out of my home primarily, and I've spent made a lot of mistakes of getting into a home office and having it work for us. So I'm going to work from the bottom down here on this slide, or bottom up, excuse me. So the home networks, many of you are IT professionals, but for those who are not IT professionals, it's not necessarily something you're aware of. Some of the ways you need to lock down your security at home. We'll talk about that. There's actually a slide, I think, just on security alone. But simple things like stop broadcasting your SSID on your access point and changing passwords, default passwords on your access point router, things like that. So the home network itself needs to be made secure, robust. Next, the home machines need that business level security. It's for us as an MSP or for companies that are managing their own equipment, you need to be able to have the same pervasive security posture at home or in the office. And that's not necessarily something that if you're not an IT professional, that you're going to kind of have the checklist prepared and be able to go through that and make that happen. But it's the weak link in the chain, right? If you have exposure at home, it could be taken. It could be used as a gateway for a bad guy to get into the network and get into your computer. Remote ready systems, when we talk about being at home with your systems, in the case of those folks who are working out of a cube or have normally been working in the office, that system is not necessarily remote ready, right? It may not have a VPN on it. And in fact, if the system that you're using at home is more of a BYOD situation, using your home computer, your home tablet to get to the office, it's certainly not remote ready. So there are security issues there. There are connectivity issues to be overcome. So you have to be very, considerate that there are things that you need to fix. And then creating a workspace at home. I think if we go to the next slide, we have some more details there. I wanted to spend some time there.
Yeah, and I think one of the other options, Jeff, too, is when we have these work machine at home, really the ability then to, hey, should we just from an IT standpoint be spinning up desktops in the cloud? And that way we're not having to deal with home machines. They mainly are the connector, but really it's these desktops in the cloud that we're able to spin up and help companies get mobile very quickly where the endpoint doesn't matter as much.
Right, there's multiple ways to attack that problem, Michael, as you point out. It could be with a BYOD device. It could be taking your actual work system home with you. That's actually what some of our customers have done. And finally, getting a VDI situation where you're working out of the cloud is yet another way.
So real quick, guys, I'll be the non-tech guy in the room and ask. And a lot of our attendees may already know about this, but what is BYOD? And I know it's just a simple acronym, but then tell us, what does it mean to have a virtual desktop? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that affect me, just a normal user?
Yeah, so Chris, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, please, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So bring your own device is BYOD, right? And so that's a typical consumer device. People are able to pick whatever they like. Let's say it's a mobile device, Android, iOS, whatever the case may be. What's really interesting about this is kind of as Michael mentioned, when we first realized that so many clients and so many people were going to be asked to be working from home, the initial request we got was for laptops. How do we get people laptops and make sure they're secured, right? Well, everybody's trying to do that, and so naturally there's a little bit of a crunch to make those available. And so we're dealing with the fact of well, how, and this is probably something we'll touch on later slides, but how do we secure the home devices, right? Because there's a lot of things that we don't have control over that, right? So in a BYOD environment, we have to somehow exhibit some kind of control. So there's tools that we can leverage, like Intune, if it's part of the Microsoft Office 365 stack, to try and secure anything that's going to communicate over those methods. In terms of VDI, or what you also hear about is desktop as a service. So that's a technology and something that I see that we're going to see a big rise in demand for, based on just what we're dealing with now that's going to come out of this, right? And so the thinking behind it is, when you're in the office, you're connecting to a virtual desktop that's in the cloud somewhere, and so, for example, Microsoft has deployed their Windows Virtual Desktop service, and it's something I think a lot of people are going to try to leverage, because you can then go home, connect to that same instance, and everything is identical. All the stuff that you had while in the office, you have at home, or whether you're, you know, wherever you happen to be and you have remote internet connectivity. So those are definitely technologies that I see that are going to be in high demand for, and that we can leverage.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to ask a couple follow-up questions to that, but real quick, we had somebody in the chat, and again, everyone, please feel free to chime in on the chat with any questions you have. The question is from Kimberly: if we are already working remote and logging into our Workspace desktop via Executech Connect, are we safe as far as security? And I guess, what are the security measures for using that remote access desktop?
Yeah, you mind if I take this one?
Please do.
Okay. So this is something, this has actually been, and I'm sure Kimberly's experienced this. We had a little bit of a scramble in trying to get people connectivity to their machines at the office. One of the things, one of the asks is, as consultants, is we need to make sure that the computer that's connecting to that service, even though all it's doing is rendering the screen, is also secure, right? So we need to take a look at it, make sure it's got antivirus. If it doesn't, we need to put something on there, because you know, many of these machines in the, you know, at home, like I have this at home, my kids use computers, they might go to some website and play some web game. Well, who knows what may be a part of that, right? There could be something unintendedly but malicious as part of that, right? And so whether it's a keylogger or something else, so part of it is just us doing due diligence on our part to make sure the environment is secure. If we can't use like a company provided machine, along with that, you know, is just, you know, we have tools at our disposal where we can just do a scan of the network at home to make sure, see what's on the network. If there's anything that's not, you know, doesn't have any holes or anything like that, or something malicious. So yeah, that's definitely a part of using something like Screen Connect, where really it seems benign. All we're doing is we're just rendering the screen and accepting keystrokes, but we still have to make sure that the device that's happening on itself is secure.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, that's a big change for something that we've done in the past, right? It's normally you don't like to touch people's home machines. That's not an area you necessarily like to get involved. But given the scramble and how quick this came on, and then frankly, the inability in some cases to get desktops or laptops for weeks out, we suddenly found ourselves in that situation where we were helping people get their home system secure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I think that is important.
Great. So talking about the actual workspace, you see that Chris and I are working out of our respective homes. Michael's working out of the office. You saw at the beginning, if you were on, Gary's working in his basement in the bunker, and we all try to find a space where we get a couple of things. One is, can you make it as quiet as possible, right? So we want to have these types of conversations without being distracted. When Gary and I talked about it, we talked about setting ground rules. I said, Gary, can we have this at least at 10 o'clock or later on Friday, because the gentlemen who come and take care of my lawn are here at 9 o'clock on Friday. And there's a blower going right outside my window at 9:30. So if we could do it a little bit later. And this is also around being flexible, but ground rules are, you know, keep your family, if you can, out of that workspace if it's at all possible. For some of you, it will be difficult. In some cases, you have two parents working at home along with their children who are no longer in school, and it's very difficult to get that to happen. We're empty nesters here, so my wife knows that if the door is closed, that I'm in a meeting and I don't get disturbed. So I'm very fortunate for that. I have a neighbor about a quarter mile from here. I go past his house all the time. He's a Giants fan, so I say hi. And he has his garage door rolled up during the middle of the day when he's sitting at his desk in his garage. We're fortunate here in Northern California to have the weather to do that, but sometimes you may be forced to find maybe a not so obvious space where you can have your own space. So the ground rules are around access and noise to your workspace for the most part. I think it's pretty practical there. The flexible part is if you heard a dog bark now, I would hope that you not see that reflecting upon my professionalism, right? There's something that all of us are going to have to be challenged with when we're working out of the home is, your 3-year-old doesn't understand what they're supposed to be doing, or your dog doesn't. So being flexible is important. Setting standard work hours. For those of you who are new to working at home, the challenges are you will find, if you already haven't, that it's you really need to go to work in the morning. My routine is the same whether I'm going into our office or whether I'm working here in the home office, and that is I get up at the same time, I take the dog for the walk, shower at the same time, dress for work, right? No matter if I'm going to have a video conference or not. You need to feel like you're going to work in order to maintain your sanity, but also to help you get into that mode that you're going to work. You're not at home anymore. When you're in your workspace at home, you're in the office. If you don't set the standard work hours, you're going to find that you might be in your jammies and slippers at 7 a.m. You turn on the computer, you check your email. Next thing you know, it's 10 or 11 o'clock, and you're supposed to be on a video conference. You still have bedhead. It's not a good thing. So you set your standard work hours and keep your routine. You're going to avoid things like that. The last thing here is taking breaks. One of the things to be productive, because you're not distracted like you are in the office. I don't have people coming by my desk and saying hi. I'm not in the kitchen grabbing a bagel. I'm sitting here in this great quiet environment where I can just grind and grind and grind. The problem is you will become less productive over time. You'll find yourself working through lunch. You'll find yourself getting tired at 2 in the afternoon because you haven't stopped once since you got to your desk. So please, even if you have to say, hey Google, set an alarm for 90 minutes from now, right? So something to remind you.
Alarm set for 11:52 a.m.
He's listening, no matter where I go.
Always listening, Jeff. Always listening.
Forgot that was there. So now I'm going to be taking a break in 90 minutes. You can be sure of that. Thank you.
Kind of on the technology side of these things, one thing I've noticed, I started working here at home recently, is I've had my router set up, obviously, for years. We stream Netflix just fine. But now I'm worried, okay, we've got these webinars, we're going to be doing more video conferencing. Is my modem, is my router up to par? What sort of thing are these things that people should be keeping in mind? What should they be looking for when it comes to the connectivity side of being at home?
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is you run speed tests to see what kind of uplink downlink speed you have if you're not aware of what those are. You may need to go to your provider and ask them to bump that up to the next level if you're not getting the speed that you need. Also note that you can be constrained on throughput by your equipment at home. So your router or your access point may be locking you down to less bandwidth than your provider is giving you. So you really need to walk through each component of your home network and make sure you've got throughput. Number 2 is part of setting the ground rules is those of you that have a couple teenagers at home and they're bored and they're ending up playing games with their friends. So if they're gaming and it's a live shooter game and they are using up a ton of your bandwidth. And if you're trying to have a video conference at that same time, that's not going to work for you. So you have to, as part of your ground rules, ensure that the technology that is there is being allocated to business first and play second.
Hey, Chris, did you guys put together anything for clients working from home in terms of just trying to get some standard products, whether that was standard antivirus, someone asked about antivirus on the Mac, or standard routers they should be looking at? Did you put anything together that would help people that way, or is it just the same standard products you would use all the time?
Yeah, for the most part, it's standard products that we kind of we already recommend. I believe our consultants have that, but I don't know that we send anything out to clients. But to kind of speak to what Jeff was talking about a little bit there, like brings up a really good point. So one of the challenges with this is we have a lot of clients and people that are trying to use VPNs to connect into the office, right? And traditional VPNs may run over a certain technology, but then you're dealing with a consumer router at home that focuses on like HTTP normal web traffic, right? And so there's a lot of challenges with that. Or it may be that they've got a Comcast router and then a wireless router right in front of that, right? And so they just can't connect with the VPN, or it struggles and works half of the time. And so those are some things that are hurdles sometimes that we deal with, and so that actually leverages or lends itself really nicely to go towards a VDI or a desktop as a service type environment. But yeah, I know somebody asked about like Mac antivirus. I mean, for us, Sophos, that's what we would recommend, or anything that I don't know. There's some others that'll work well on the Mac, but our preference obviously is Sophos, just because it works so well in terms of like and as an anti-ransomware solution. The other thing too is a lot of home devices, they don't do deep packet inspection. There's no packet inspection involved, right? Whereas like in the office, we're putting in these Sonic walls and Sophos firewalls, which that's specifically what they're designed to do, to secure a network. So those are things where we need to keep that in consideration and make sure that we're putting in some type of a solution that's going to keep that in mind, whether it's a VPN tunnel or otherwise.
Right. Right. That's great.
Just while I'm thinking of it, I read an article the other day, Microsoft blog, about how some folks are running into an issue. They're crushing their VPN concentrators at corporate and chewing up a lot of corporate bandwidth because they don't have split tunnel implemented. So yeah. Especially those customers who are using Office 365 and a lot of SaaS applications, rather than going directly to the cloud, they're going through their corporate network and back out.
Yeah, and again, as we're talking about security and some of these other things, right? When you start looking at home-based machines, corporate security still has to apply. We have to provide secure access. Chris talked about some of that. So Chris, I think when we're looking at that secure access, I think you're right. We can't take any of that for granted. It still has to be corporate level, even if you're going to use a home machine.
Yeah, I mean, part of that in my mind is like, you know, in corporate, we think, okay, well, how do we secure passwords? Well, MFA, multi-factor authentication, or 2FA, is something that we're pretty familiar with, right? That still needs to apply at home. If anything, it's more important there, just because we may be dealing with environments and situations where we don't have complete control. So.
Yeah, and I think getting people out of using those generic passwords, right? I think in some cases we have both generic passwords on home products, but then you also have people that use the same password over and over again. And as we see through our dark web service, where something like that gets exposed, maybe through a target hack or something, and now all of a sudden that internal password is known because the person's used the same password over and over again. So we need to set some sort of standards so that people are changing those passwords. And I think one of the things you were talking about is how this has really made IT busier. So Chris, speak to that a little bit in terms of everyone else in some cases are maybe not quite as busy, but that's changed for us in a different way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So there might be a little bit of a misconception is like, okay, well, there's nobody in the office, so things are probably like calmed down and maybe there's less to do, right? That's actually not the case. If anything, there's more environments for us to try to secure, right? Because people are working at home or in other places. There's quite a bit to do. There's quite a bit for us to, just to monitor and make sure that we're paying attention to keep things secure. So definitely.
There was
Absolutely.
a question in the chat that, a little technical for me, but this is the right crew to ask. Tyson was asking about, is there a way to get around not having a static IP at home? For example, we can use our work phones at home if they whitelist the IP, but Xfinity doesn't offer static IPs. It's all Greek to me, so I mean, what do you?
So this is actually really interesting because So Xfinity at Home, they don't let you purchase a static IP, but in all honesty, unless you go and you do a complete reset on your device, your modem, you will keep the same IP. So for example, like I have Xfinity at Home, right? And I have that exact scenario. I've had the same IP address for 3 years now. So they don't change it unless you do a complete reset on the device. So there may be ways to get around that. The other thing we can do, if we do need to make sure something's secure, VPN is going to be the answer to that.
Yeah.
Using shared keys and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think one of the great things for us right now is that because of the fact that a guy like Jeff has been working from home for a very long time, we do have this virtual world already out there. I mean, if you just Google work from home, there's tons of resources, a lot of tools that are available. So that it's all of that's great. I think from a collaboration standpoint, there's great products. I think one of the things that we're also expecting to see is people were in some ways forced into the cloud, whether that's a cloud-based desktop, whether it's cloud-based tools like a Microsoft Teams. And what we're finding with our clients as we're looking at the usage is this isn't going to go away. Now that the capabilities are there, now that people have seen it, this isn't going to change. The Microsoft Teams usage we're seeing is just skyrocketing for some of our clients. That's not suddenly going to go away when they go back in the office. That now has become a critical tool for them. So we're going to be seeing, I think, a whole bunch more of this in terms of the products and the tool set. So Jeff, as we look at this slide talking about tools a little bit, and again, I'm a huge fan of Microsoft Teams, and we're seeing great success with it with our clients that have suddenly had to be remote. Why don't you talk to some of these items here?
Yeah, sure. Teams is something that I never thought I would adopt to the degree that I've adopted it. I lived in Outlook, old school, lived in my email forever and ever. And when we first started using Teams, I didn't understand the value. But what Teams gives you is the ability, first of all, to come as close as you can probably to replicating being in the office in terms of you have multiple ways to connect. You can do video, you could voice, and this is in one-to-one. Everything I'm talking about is one-to-one or groups, right? Chat, video, voice, presence, so someone can tell whether or not you're busy. I can sit there, and the other day I was in one of these, and I went into in a webinar, and I was presenting, and I put my presence as do not disturb, and then I put a status up that says presenting in a webinar will be done at 12 o'clock. Now I also set in my presence the ability to provide that status message until 12 o'clock, and then that status message would go away automatically. So there are things that you can do to help others understand where your head's at, what you're busy doing, whether or not you're available. And it does it in an even more important way. It'll help you understand when someone else that you need to talk to is available. You can do a search, for instance, if you're in a larger organization, you can do a search for, hey, who knows about VPN, for instance? In this case, one of the things we're talking about. And it will go scrub my emails and everything in Teams for VPN and give me a list of people who know VPN. Then and when it gives me that list, I see their presence. So if I want to talk to somebody about VPN, first of all, I know who our folks are who are experts, and then I also know who is available to chat. So it's one of those things where it's very hard to replicate being in an office where you can shout over the cube or tap someone on the shoulder or pull someone into the hallway. But you can simulate doing all those things with Teams. And I think that's why it's for remote users. It's one of the things that keeps us connected. It's part of our culture to use Teams, and we have a really good time with it. Now, if you're going to be a remote user, you have to know how to use the tool. So you need some training that could be self-taught or spoon-fed from some other resource, whether it's Microsoft themselves, a training provider, or your MSP. You want to test your gear as well. As well as knowing you need to test. Now I've got an 8-year-old Logitech HD cam that you're looking at me now, and I didn't know if that would be supported because there are certain chipsets that are required in order to be supported through Teams. So I found out that this is one of those that will work. Your microphone is very important. If there's any ambient noise in here, it's not as cool, but I'll put my earbuds in, plug it into the computer, and test that, right? So you need to know what's going to work, what's not going to work when you're remote. The IM and video are the things that you test. Know when to use them, have the etiquette to use them as appropriate. Your status, I mentioned earlier about status being something that I use extensively. This is something that works 2 ways. You have to keep your own status up to date, and you also have to respect when someone else's status says, do not disturb. Now, there are ways, even in Teams, that get around that. So I can put do not disturb up, and I can also say manage my priorities. And I can list, so I report to Chris. Chris is on that list of people who can interrupt me. And I thought that was politically the right thing to do. I also have my cohort in crime, Brad Baird, who is my peer working here. We collaborate on a gazillion things. I want him to be able to get a hold of me, and our CEO, of course. So I'm able to manage my IM to a great degree to ensure that people who need to talk to me can get to me, but also that my time is important. I need to protect my time and make sure that that's not abused.
Hey, Jeff, just want to jump in real quick. I know you're kind of going through the steps here, the pieces of Teams, but we had kind of a broad question of the advantage of Teams over a Zoom or a Slack.
Yeah, that's a great question, Damon. So it's interesting. I would say that Teams and Slack are very close in terms of how you would use them. Zoom is absolutely not in the same realm, simply because Slack and Teams allow you to take everything that you do and all the resources that you use to get the job done and put those into containers, if you would. So for instance, when I'm in Teams and I'm on a project, so we as a company are pursuing the Azure Expert MSP certification. I have a team, I have a channel within Teams that is dedicated to that. The people who are members of that team are the only people who really need to understand what's going on there. They're part of that team, right? So they get to see group chats, they get to see associated files. We have a plan that we put together in Planner that's available. There's a history of all of those things. There are other files that we use that are associated, and they're all in one place. That's not something that Zoom does for you, right? Slack is very much the kind of the same way. In the case of our company, because we're very Microsoft centric, it's kind of the way to go. And the other part of it is the application integration is very good for all the other Microsoft apps. So it's kind of a go-to for us. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think one of the other interesting things we're seeing is some terminology things when we're talking about what's a team versus what's a channel. I was dealing with one of our architecture clients the other day, and they operate out of studios. So we had to talk to them about, okay, well, really your team is your studio that you operate out of. You have 4 different studios, and maybe the channels then represent the projects that those teams happen to work on. And we spend a great deal of time getting teams set up. It's a very easy product to use, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're allowing it to have a setup that facilitates how that company happens to operate. And that's been real important.
Something else I'd kind of just throw out there is that with Teams is not just, so I kind of view it as like a hub for everything Microsoft because it touches the complete Microsoft stack, but it's not just for internal use. Like we have several projects we're working on with clients, and they are part of our team's infrastructure, and we all kind of share part of that team that they're a part of, and it's secure. You know, there's limitations that you can put around who has access to what.
And Chris, that makes a great point, and it's really the same point that Michael made. You can do so much with Teams. It's incredibly flexible, and if you aren't aware of all the features and all of the gotchas, it could also get you in trouble. In that it'll either not do what you'd like it to do, or you will unknowingly open things up to folks who shouldn't have it. So, for instance, some folks don't understand the ability to create a private channel. And if you don't create a private channel, you are really opening up everything in your channel to everyone who's a member of your team. So in that case, it's not always great. So let's say that you, as part of the management team, had created a budget channel and you didn't make it private. It would mean that anyone who is in the team above that channel could have access to those budgeting numbers. So you have to be very cognizant of how Teams works in order to securely take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, just
And again,
quick.
I think the great thing about this is that as people are seeing this and using it, really, in a lot of ways, there's no turning back, right? This is now, we've spread this out. People are in the cloud, people are using the products, and there's just no turning back on it.
Plug that we do have a webinar on Teams on how to use it. So if your organization is already using it, but you're a little unfamiliar with the ins and outs, we have a pre-recorded webinar, but also a webinar you could re-attend next week to get some tips on that. And as you said, you know, it's custom to every organization, and we can help get that set up, get that going. We have a couple more questions wanted to hit on. I don't want to put us too close to time here, but we have somebody asking that we have challenges where people have gone back to their home countries like China. What advice do you have for folks in China that can't punch through the Great Firewall?
Chris, that sounds like you.
It does. So yeah, that's a great question. So in those type of scenarios, typically what they're doing is like they have limited traffic, right? Traffic can only, a typical VPN is probably not going to work. So what we would do is we'd have to set up some type of system, whether it's desktop as a service or like a Screen Connect type solution where they can get to that. That may not have all the tools and all the things that they need, but they can use that almost as like a jump solution or like a staging solution to jump to get to with the real resources that they need. So some of those solutions are not like they're not perfect. They're not. Sometimes they have a little more hoops that you have to jump through. But yeah, we can come up with solutions for those types of scenarios.
A good question here, taking us again back to the basics a little bit. What is a VPN? Basic question there. And then what is the difference between VPN and remote desktop access?
Yeah, great question. So VPN, you can think of as taking, let's think we're at home, right? So taking your home network, and there's different types of VPN as well. Let's say for the sake of like, I have my computer at home and I need to connect to resources at the office. So what it does is it essentially creates what's called a tunnel that's secure and encrypted between your computer at home and the network at the office, right? Now at the office, they may put up restrictions on what you can access from home, but all that traffic that's occurring between the computer and the office at home is encrypted, so it's secure. So there's some challenges that come with that. For example, if you're, and a lot of people may have experienced this in the past, if you're trying to work with like Excel files or Word files that are on a file share at the office, but you're just opening them up on your computer at home, sometimes it's really clunky. It's slow. It may not work. It may disconnect on you, especially if you're wireless at home. So what we're seeing more is like for specific needs and applications, that works, but for the general use, that may not be the best solution. And so then we look at something like remote desktop. So remote desktop has gone through a whole bunch of iterations. And if we're talking about Microsoft remote desktop specifically, there have been some exploits and some holes that have been found over time, right? And so as IT administrators, we have to make sure that those are secure. And so we can combine VPN with remote desktop to a computer at the office. We can leverage other solutions that may be layered on top of remote desktop. So that kind of goes towards that desktop as a service where you're remoting into something, but it's something that's layered on top of remote desktop, like Parallels, or there's a bunch of solutions, Citrix, things of that nature that sit on top of it.
So Chris,
And then all you're doing is you're just drawing the screen and passing on keyboard and mouse information.
Chris,
Yeah, go ahead.
are you as comfortable with the remote desktop gateway setup as the VPN, or would you prefer one over the other? One of the questions is talking about that particular nuance, and I was just curious. A lot of people tend to think, look, you're using one or the other, either is going to be fine. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts are it comes down to how it's secured, right? So the remote desktop gateway is great, and that basically takes HTTP, HTTPS, and funnels RDP over that. I think we have to make sure that that gateway is then secure. So there's got to be some type of like IDS intrusion detection system that sits in front of it, because to be honest, anything that's going to be sitting out there on the web, and this may not be something people are aware of, but like hackers are going to sit there and they just scan the internet, right? And they go, oh, here's some open IPs. Oh, this is an RDP web gateway. Well, let me just start my brute force script that's going to go start with these key accounts that I know of and try to get in, right? So that's a fine solution as long as there's like an IDS solution sitting in front of it.
That's great.
A couple questions back on Teams real quick, and I think we'll wrap it up from there unless anybody has another pressing question. Is can you connect to someone using Slack through using your Teams? And maybe Jeff touch on that just briefly. I know we reference a little bit how to get external users connected in Teams, but is there a cross Slack Teams connection?
Yes, I haven't seen any connector that's specific to doing exactly that, but there's nothing keeping the Slack user from being on Teams as well. And sometimes, well, let me say this. So if someone's going to be regularly working with, let's say on projects with an external resource, and that external resource uses Teams within their organization, you can give someone guest access, which would be okay if it's every once in a while and they didn't need extensive access to all the tools. Now, if they are going to be more like having someone from your own team just working somewhere else, where you need to give them access to all the tools, you can actually federate between the two organizations. And if you can federate between the two organizations, then someone can have member access to your channels and operate just like any other member. So that's the more intimate engagement that you'd want to have take place. So I guess it depends is the answer here, how you would do that.
I think unless anybody has any other questions, we will wrap this up. Thank you everyone for attending and for submitting your questions. Also, thank you to those. I know there were a couple people that also answered some questions about speed tests and things. Appreciate that. We'll have a recording of this webinar after coming soon. Also, again, just want to make you aware, we're going to be doing weekly webinars for the foreseeable future. We want to make sure that you're getting the information you need as we go through this unique situation. Next week, again, is on disaster recovery. We'll have a link to that again in the recap. And again, if you want a training on how to use Microsoft Teams, or if there are other topics that you want us to cover, please let us know, and please go look for those. Thanks, everyone, and have a great weekend.